To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, 𝐓𝐡𝐞.
Friederike Fabritius is a neuroscientist and trailblazer in the field of neuroleadership. Her brain-based leadership training programs have transformed how Fortune 500 executives think, innovate, and navigate change. She is a thought leader and keynote speaker known for engaging global audiences at organizations like Google, Ernst & Young, Boston Consulting Group, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, Accenture, Deloitte, BMW, and Harvard Business Review, among many others. She is the award-winning author of several books and has just published a new book titled The Brain-Friendly Workplace: Why Talented People Quit and How to Get Them to Stay. And we're going to talk about that today. Friederike, I'm thrilled that you're here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we were talking, but for the benefit of the audience, you're in Heidelberg, Germany.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, thank you. I know you have a family and it's dinner time there, so thank you for sharing your time. We really want to get into it. But before we do, the intro was good, didn't do you justice. Tell us a little bit more. What do we need to know about you as a person?
Well, I'm a neuroscientist by training, and the way I became a neuroscientist is because I'm very curious about human nature. So I've always cared about people. Even at a very small age, I've always been interested in people, why they behave the way they do, what makes them tick. And so that to me has always been my passion and still is. And what I like about my job is that I can also help people lead better lives, work better, have more fulfilled lives. So I love when people reach out to me and say, I'm using this fun, fear, and focus idea from your book, and it really has transformed how I work. So this is me at my job. I work as a keynote speaker, mostly virtual these days, simply because, it's good for everyone involved. It's less hassle and it's more enjoyable. I also have 5 kids, so to me, that's just easier. And well, what makes me tick? I love long walks. I need exercise. I do all the brain-friendly things I advocate in my book and my work. I always test them on myself first. So I love to, get my sleep right, exercise. I love reading. I have 5 kids, so that keeps me on my toes as well. Yeah.
Yes. Well, listen, this podcast is, as you know, all about leadership. Our audience is full of people who aspire to becoming, first of all, we have some that aren't leaders yet, so they aspire to be leaders. And the most of the folks here are currently serving in leadership roles. And obviously, this is all about aspiring to world-class excellence as a leader. So let me ask you a couple questions up front right off the bat on leadership. If I met you in an elevator and we only had a minute to go before you got off, and I found out who you were, and I said, okay, give me your philosophy on leadership. So very short, condensed. What's your take on leadership? What's your leadership philosophy?
I think leadership needs to respect the way the brain works. So if you use techniques that are in line with how the brain functions, you will always succeed. So if you understand people, if you understand how the brain works, you can be a much more effective leader.
Yeah, I like that. I've got your book. I haven't read it cover to cover, but I've jumped around. I've watched a bunch of your podcast interviews. I want to see what you say about this. This is not on our outline. It's an ad lib question, but I always tell people, as you know, I served in the Marine Corps for 24 years, then came into business. And I tell people that I led businessmen and women just like I did Marines, and they find that hard to believe. And I say, no, because the common denominator is people. And human nature has not changed and will not change. The environment changes, society changes, technology. I think we're saying the same thing. If you're saying understand the brain, and I think you're saying human nature. Are we saying the same thing there?
We're saying the same thing there. It's people in the end, though I would say in the military, it's probably a lot of testosterone floating around, which might create a different ambience than if you're leading people with more of an estrogen neurosignature. Mm-hmm. So I do think that probably some of the principles in the military work very well in hierarchical structures, but maybe then if you go into an environment where people are more into, I don't know, well-being right. and these things, maybe the tactics will be slightly different. To give you one example, so we do say the same thing. I totally agree. But I'm just thinking, for example, for many years, all the research on stress has been done on male mice, and they found the fight, flight, or freeze response, and that's become very popular and very famous in its own right. But what they missed was research on female mice, and then they found the tend and befriend response, which was more about helping each other in a crisis, being there for each other, becoming more cooperative, which is another helpful way of dealing with crisis. And I think sometimes, when there's a lot of testosterone, you will see different behavioral patterns than when there's not. That's all. That's the only little thing I'm thinking, that of course the people who join the military are probably not 100% representative of the entire population. They will have certain traits, probably certain preferences, certain passions.
Yes, I agree entirely with that. My whole claim to fame was I did lead businessmen and women exactly like the military, and that doesn't mean I didn't have to adapt. Even in the Marine Corps, I had to adapt from unit to unit, person to person. And we do have women in the Marine Corps, so it's not a completely high testosterone. I do agree that that environment is a high testosterone warrior environment. But that said, I find that most people get their vision of the military from movies. And 24 years, I can count on one hand the number of times I raised my voice at a Marine, excluding in a combat situation where you have to be heard and all of that. I actually, believe it or not, found the military to be much more polite and mannerisms and customs and courtesies than the business world. But that said, I led teams in the business world of diverse people, diverse races, cultures, ages. Never had a problem, because while human nature hasn't changed, I think a good leader has to realize that every human is different. And
of course,
you cannot approach people in a cookie cutter fashion. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. Every person, every brain is different.
Yeah.
So actually also when I'm speaking of testosterone, it's not only because there are many men in the military, but also what I'm thinking about is the high testosterone neurosignature, which also women can have, by the way. So I just wanted to clarify this. So it's not just about gender. It's more, so for example, we all are influenced a bit by genetics and a bit by our experiences. So I would say it's 50-50 nature, nurture on most things. And we all have certain strength. So I think that's a core idea from my book is this neurosignature diversity. We have different brains. People with a high testosterone neurosignature, for example, will be very logical. They will have a lot of systems thinking, so they will figure out technology rapidly. They're going to cut through the noise and reduce complexity. They're going to get straight to the point. They're very fair. They won't go and backstab you. So when you said that the environment in the military is often more polite than in the business world, I think it's also because people with high testosterone neurosignature very often pay a lot of attention to fairness and being honest and these kind of values. And then on the other side, high estrogen neurosignatures, and this can be men too. Mm-hmm. It's more about building a connection, empathy, lateral thinking. So it's less this 1, 2, 3 executive summary. It's more of like finding patterns in data and coming up with more unconventional solutions. Yeah. So I think what is important here is that when we think of diversity, it's very much, around things you can see, like gender or race, and that's great. But I think we're not thinking enough in addition to that, of how different brains function. And I think we don't need one kind of workplace for everyone. We need different workplaces and different ways of working for different people.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. That was my experience in the business world. I learned very quickly. I was in a large $1 billion plus recruiting firm. And so most of our people were recruiters. So they're sales oriented. And I learned very quickly that the brain, the aptitude and the biases and traits of a good salesman or woman is often completely different from a data processor, data entry, project manager. And to your point, I think if that company had too much of either in the wrong role, it's going to be trouble. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. I think we need more diversity of thought, more diversity of different brains. And more importantly, we also need to understand that we need to develop people along their strength. To give you one example, when I worked in business consulting, they realized that I was terrible at Excel. I'd never touched an Excel sheet before. I'm a neuroscientist, hello. And so they sent me to all these Excel trainings. It was like Excel for beginners, Excel for advanced, Excel for the hopeless. You know, I was there. And I spent all my time working on my weaknesses because they wanted me to become more like a data analyst. And I kept asking for HR projects. And I said, you know, I speak 6 languages. I can go work with clients in different countries. Send me there. I can, you know, do more from a neuroscience angle, from a behavioral angle. But they were completely blind to that because they were so focused on, you know, erasing my weaknesses. They didn't succeed. I'm still terrible at Excel. But in my work right now, I don't need Excel. If I need a good Excel sheet, I know who to go to. And I think in companies, we work in teams, so we shouldn't force everyone to be good at everything. We should allow people to have a few really good skills that they're really work on and get better on. And then we need somebody who compensates for each team member's weaknesses.
Yes, I agree entirely. You're singing my song, Friederike. I did 15 years as a C-level executive in a publicly traded company. So one of the 5 top executives never learned Excel. I mean, I could open the sheet up and look at it. I could not manipulate it, didn't want to manipulate it. And I am one of the rare executives. I did not know how to create a PowerPoint presentation my entire time because I thought, first of all, when I first entered the business world, computers were new. So these programs were new. So therefore, I didn't know it. All the young folks knew it. They grew up with it. And I realized very quickly that that company, I was highly compensated. That company was not paying me to be an executive or an admin assistant creating. They were paying me what I would do is I would write them on paper, give it to the executive assistant and say, this is a presentation. I'm going in this meeting. By the time I was out of the meeting, an hour later, she had the first rough draft. I would go pen whip it and all that, give it back to her. But I can use PowerPoint now, but I never opened up PowerPoint and made a change. Never. And therefore, it wasn't important to me. So I agree with you. Don't know Excel. And so for you, when you said Excel for the hopeless, I laughed at this. For me, it's Excel and PowerPoint for the unwilling. I didn't want to do it. And I coach executives and I tell them, if you find yourself, and they all do it, if you find yourself doing something that your executive or administrative assistant can do, you are really wasting that brain power. That company and the shareholders are not getting the full value out of it. They are not paying you to be an administrative clerk. Any thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. So I think you're telling people exactly the right thing. They should think, what I can do best? What are my top skills? And then you should leverage that most of the time and delegate everything else. That's when people get the best value. And even more so, I think that's probably also something you may have observed, that people work longer and hustle more, though the results are not necessarily better. So from a brain perspective, actually counterintuitive to what we think, working more does not always translate in better results. So if you put in those extra 2 hours to refine the PowerPoint, this will not add value to the company. You will have worked more. It looks like you worked more, but actually our brains are wired to be most productive for short bursts of a couple hours where you get into the flow state. And if you do everything yourself, you're so busy that you can never allow yourself to get into flow. And in flow, we can be innovative. We come up with unusual solutions. We really add value. And so it's important to not be thinking you need to do everything and you need to do it 24/7.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Well, listen, I love the brain stuff. I love your content and your background. So let's get into it. Before we do, though, I want to ask you so we can clarify for the audience. Everybody now knows you're a neuroscientist or starting to get a feel for what you do. But what do you do? Who hires you? How do you help people? Who do you help?
Yeah, I work with Fortune 500 companies across the globe on how to help people work smarter, better, and happier using neuroscience. Basically, what I do is I do large events. So I'm a keynote speaker. Mm-hmm. I'm also a certified coach, but I don't do any coaching. The only thing I do is keynote speaking. So that's also from my perspective. I don't do a million different things. I turn down most requests. What I love to do is, get on a mostly virtual stage and deliver a beautiful keynote that inspires people. Hopefully my goal would be that it inspires for the rest of their lives so that it changes their lives. But it's really in speaking that's just what I enjoy most because it helps me to reach a lot of people with my message. And also I just enjoy how do I put it? Like you have to be creative. You need to think which stories can I use to engage people? Which jokes can I put? It's also a quite intellectual challenge. So it keeps me on my toes to always think, how can I present this better? So I'm enjoying that. So I only do one thing and that's keynote speaking, period.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listen, you've published several books. Most recent was just published A Brain-Friendly Workplace. Tell us a little bit about it. Why did you write this book and who is it aimed for?
Well, I realized when I came out of the laboratory and joined the business world, I worked for McKinsey & Company, and I realized that the way people are working is not in line with how the brain works best. I was seeing our clients, I was seeing how we worked. It was a lot of hustle. And at the same time, when you look at the statistics, we know that roughly 2/3 of people are stressed out at work, if not more, depends on how you measure it. And just as many are disengaged and bored. And so the big question remains, why? What's going on with these people? What is it that is so wrong? And I think there's a very simple solution. I had a hypothesis in a long time that it's all because of something that I call the neuro gap. And I'll explain in a second what it is. I thought, okay, all the people at the top of organizations have a certain neurosignature, so they tick in a certain way, and they create a work environment that works great for them, but not for the rest of us. And I was thinking we need more neurosignature diversity. We need more diverse brains, and when we do that, everyone will be happy at work. So we need to adapt the workplace to our brains rather than trying to fit in with our brains into the workplace. That might sound very theoretical, but maybe I can give you an idea. I looked at a data set of executives, and I found that, which was provided to me by NeuroColor, a company that measures neurosignatures and personality profiles and, let's say, brain profiles of executives. And I found that most people at the top, women and men, have high dopamine, high testosterone neurosignatures. So they love a fast-paced environment. Yeah. They are very stress-resistant, more than the rest of us. They require less sleep. They love competition. They love change. They love getting ahead, and they burn for their work. And of course, people tend to create work environments that work great for themselves. They don't realize that somebody else might need something completely different. And since we don't have much diversity of thought in leadership positions, I think we're creating a culture that's high stress, when in reality, for some people, you need to decrease stress so they reach the best performance. So I wrote a book about neurosignature diversity, as I coined it, because I think we need to add another dimension to the diversity game.
I have, thank you for that. I have one ad lib question for you. With the neurosignatures and biases, I do agree, by the way, with your anecdotal, your empirical data on the makeup of executive teams matches my experience and empirical findings. Male or female, it's a different breed of cat at the top. Most of them are physically fit. I've never seen an obese senior executive because they strive for excellence across the board. And so they may not be Olympic athletes, but you get my point. They want to be excellent at everything, and they typically have done that since they were children. Do you find, relative to that, do you find value and worth and correlation with the popular personality tests, Myers-Briggs, DISC, and things like that?
There's certainly correlations. So, of course, for example, this test that was the foundation to my data has correlations to the Big Five. The Big Five is for our listeners here, is the personality test that has the most research attached to it in the scientific world. So there are different dimensions of personality, and it is valid and reliable. So this correlates well with this test. As far as the tests that are used in the business world are concerned, it's a mixed thing. Yes, there are correlations. I do think that some of these tests are very unscientific, and even though they help people to understand themselves better because it opens up a dialogue about people's differences, they're sometimes inaccurate. So if you take the Myers-Briggs, for example, it forces you to choose between thinking and feeling, which, when you look at how the brain works, those two dimensions are not necessarily in opposition. You can be somebody who's highly analytical, very rational, and at the same time very empathetic and emotional, and it forces you to choose. And then, so some of these dimensions, I think, are not completely in line with how the brain works. There's also a lack of validity, a lack of reliability. So one wish I would have for the corporate world was, yes, I think personality tools are great, but very often the people who buy these personality tests, they don't have the scientific background to understand whether it's really a good test. And so they take the one that has the best marketing or the best salesperson, or that has like the catchiest typing that's like easiest to understand for people to put them in these, like, I'm not saying boxes, but it's like it needs to be simple for people to work with it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are correlations, but at the same time, I think they're not to all of those tools out there, but Myers-Briggs, I can say for sure that I talked to Dan Ariely at the DLD conference in New York, and I talked to him about it, and he said, just take your horoscope. It takes less time, and it's, less expensive and just as accurate as getting your MBTI.
Wow.
So just, I'm not here to bash the MBTI, but I'm just saying I just wish there was a bit more of an ethical sense. Of course, you can make a lot of sales with some of these tests, but I just think testing is great, but please take one that actually has a scientific foundation and doesn't just measure people, because research also shows that the moment you give somebody a personality test and some kind of result that's positive, they will always find themselves in it. It will have a mix like, oh, you're highly analytical, but you're also sensitive. You're striving for excellence, but sometimes you can be a bit exhausted. People read this and they say, yeah, that's me. That's me. And there was one research where one professor gave every single student the same result to the personality test, and they all said, oh, this is me. And he had clipped it out of a horoscope, actually. So I'm just saying people's satisfaction with these tools is not always...
Yes.
I think they open up a dialogue, so that can be useful in itself, but I just think they're, like the Big Five, for example, is very solid, but it has, of course, some dimensions that in the business world, maybe people don't want to talk about it. Like, do you want to talk with your boss about the fact that you're highly neurotic? Maybe not, right? So anyhow, so that's a whole different
interesting. Interesting. I use them in my coaching practice, as you said, more of a conversation starter. Believe it or not, Friederike, a lot of times, especially with younger leaders and younger executives, it's the first wake-up call to them for them to realize that there are different personalities on the team. And I mean, I've seen people look at me with shock that not everybody thinks like them and receives data or wants to be briefed or does brief like them and all of that. So for that, it's very, very effective. I agree. I've taken them all pretty much. And most of them are very accurate with me, but there are some glaring, I'll look at and say, no, that is absolutely not true about me. It's just not true. So I think they're more art than science. And I caution people, learn from it, see where you got what you have on your team, but certainly don't make any hiring or promotion decisions or judgments based on this at all.
Exactly. But I do agree with you that in these workshops and coachings, people often have aha moments, regardless of the tool that you're using, because it shows you, like there are these exercises where one part of the group that scores high on dimension A goes in that area of the room and the other ones go in the other room. Then you can like physically see it. Oh my God, we have different preferences. We naturally assume very often that what we like, other people like. It's like a similarity bias. Yes. Also in hiring, we like to hire people similar to ourselves. We like to promote people similar to ourselves. Even our dogs look similar to us. Like there was a study where they could take dog owners and pictures of the dog owners and pictures of the dog. And you know, if I show you pictures of dog owners, like a memory and the pets, and you would have to match them, they could show that people actually were able to match these dogs to the owners. Yeah. Just based on appearances. So we do love to pick people and dogs and things that are similar.
Yeah. Yes, I've seen those. Well, listen, we're talking a lot about neurosignatures, and I don't know what I don't know about this, and obviously you're an expert at it. Would you be willing to share with us what your neurosignature is?
Of course. So I score high on dopamine. So I am very curious, energetic. I'm always want to learn. So to me, I don't want to be bored. I want to explore. I love doing new things. But dopamine comes in very different flavors. So my friend, for example, she's skydiving. I would never do that. I don't like taking physical risks at all. Or some people high on dopamine, they will take drugs. I never touch those. So just because you score high on the traits associated with the dopamine system, it doesn't mean that you will have those traits. It's just that very often, for me, it's this curiosity that I also love to explore. And then there's estrogen for me. So I really care about people. I love harmony in my life. I can be tough if I have to, but I certainly don't enjoy it. Like it gives me sleepless nights. So I enjoy like a cozy, warm environment and also creating that for the people around me. And so those two brain systems are the most dominant in me. Then, I score medium on serotonin, which is more about being reliable, accurate, checking things, detail-oriented. So, think of a lawyer, think of a scientist in the laboratories who really has to be very, very granular and specific on things. That are the serotonin traits, among others. So, for example, people who score high on serotonin will be also very social. They love going to church on Sunday or joining a political party. So they like that sense of community. Yeah. And then there's testosterone. Testosterone is about two things. One is tough-mindedness, so a certain, ability to cut through the noise and say what you think. And they enjoy that, and they enjoy debate. And then there's also systems thinking. So it's about figuring out technology and how systems work. And this research is based on the work of Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers University. She has published in peer-reviewed journals about this. and it's her company's data that I could use. So I don't, I'm just one person. So I certainly don't have a laboratory where I can test millions of people. So I'm taking her research and I'm finding, I'm applying it to the business world.
Yeah. Do you think that your neurosignature, high dopamine, did that, and I don't know the answer to this, was that a factor in your deciding not to work for a traditional company, traditional 20 or 30 year career, go to consulting, do what you're doing now because it's new environments, new injections of dopamine?
Yeah, I love the fact that I'm free and autonomous to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
I only do, I'm really serious, I only do what I like to do.
Yeah.
I have found my passion. I turn down any project I don't like. I have the luxurious situation that I can 100% of my time do things I love. Of course, there will be moments where I'm annoyed or things aren't going the way, or, I'm not saying it's always picture perfect, but I can follow my passion. And that to me is so important. I wouldn't like to just follow some orders or be stuck. I also think in corporate environments, you're wasting so much time on meetings. I get bored. I can't do it. I can't just sit there for hours. I always feel like this needs to change. It's insane. We need a better meeting culture.
Yes.
I also love the fact that nobody tells me what to do. I tell myself what I want to do. And so that is liberating to me. But of course, I also have there's no guarantee that what I'm doing will work out. It's always a bit exhilarating to make a speech in front of thousands of people and you have a new idea and you don't know if your exercise will actually work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's always a little bit of risk taking in it too.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's working for you. And you mentioned culture. I want to get into that. In the book, you talk about switching, advising people to switch to outcome cultures. I think I know what you mean by that, but let's ask the expert. What do you mean by that?
I think we need to switch from hustle culture, where it's all about the hours you put in and the effort you put in, to outcome culture, where the only thing matters is the result. So it doesn't matter where you work, when you work, how you work. It's just a question of what are you supposed to deliver and are you checking the box yes or no? So I think we need to go away from that model that somebody has to be at the desk 9 to 5 or even longer when you're a leader. Like when I work with somebody, I care, do they deliver what they're supposed to deliver? Like, do they do what they've promised they're supposed to do? I don't care if they are a night owl and love working at night, or if they're introverts and want to be left alone. Like, I really don't care. And I think in corporate culture, there's this idea that you can control people and measure productivity by hours. And that's a bit flawed because our brains are not supposed to be on for so many hours. We have set up a structure where people can't access the flow state because they're constantly disrupted by technology, by meeting, by cubicle culture, by open space offices. So I think if we give people more autonomy on how they like to work, we'll get to better results, maybe even including working fewer hours.
Yeah, yes, thank you. That's what I thought it was. And the next question is an obvious one. So I think that debate, hours worked versus work performed, is all the raging debate now, because COVID forced people here in the United States, forced us to go remote. And I find more and more companies that absolutely, I know a company that refused, we will never go remote. Then COVID happened, Friederike, and they went remote, totally remote. For 2 years, they had, and this was $1 billion plus company, they had their best years in their 40-year history during COVID with an entirely remote workforce. They were so successful that they sold a huge corporate headquarters and downsized to a building 1/5 of the size. In other words, we are remote permanently. What were we thinking? And so what's been your observations now? It's been brought to the forefront. Are people starting to learn? Are leaders starting to learn about this outcome culture?
Yes and no, because now people work from home, but they're still stuck in Zoom from morning to evening. So that's not outcome culture. If you're like, have to be in the team chat 24/7 and have to be like meeting, you can never do some thinking. But I do think to a certain degree, leaders are catching up on the fact that people can be productive even if you don't hover over their shoulders 24/7. I personally think there are certain advantages to being together in the office.
Yeah.
And there are certain advantages to working remotely, and you need to pick what works for your business.
Right.
As an, let's say, as a, business owner, and as an employee, you need to do what works for you and your lifestyle. I personally love remote work. I think it's so many endless possibilities, especially I'm also thinking, for example, of parents. So much more time for your kids if you don't commute. I think that is valuable. I also think there are so many meetings, does it really make sense to fly to a different continent for a 1-hour meeting if we can just meet on Zoom or Teams or something? So I do think that some of that has been cut out and opportunities have opened up. At the same time, I also understand company leaders that are saying, I want people to meet, because there are certain things you only discover if you go there. Like I know the example of one regional head who never goes to the region. That is problematic. I think if you're responsible for a certain geographical area on this planet, and you just sit in the home office and never visit the plants and never go see the sites and check what people are doing, you're also not really doing your job. So I think it depends on what you're supposed to deliver and what you're supposed to do.
Yes, I agree. Well, listen, you talk about something in the book, Friederike, called neurobalance. Can you tell us what it is and how do we achieve it? I'm assuming it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So neurobalance is all about the body-brain connection. We used to think that the brain controls the body, and the brain controls our emotion, and that there's like a boss up here that controls everything, and that is true, but also the body controls the brain. And that is a fairly new field, and through body-based techniques, we can get a better brain. So I have a framework: sport, sleep, snacks, and sunlight. They all have an influence on your brain that is dramatic and that gives instant results. So exposure to sunlight, the right nutrition, the way to implement exercise into your day, this all has an impact on brain performance. And I think that is something that companies have not caught up on yet, because if people just sit hunched over a computer, see no daylight, eat pizza for lunch, we aren't really harvesting those powerful mechanisms into our life.
Yeah, I like that. You also talk quite a bit in your book about stress. Obviously, stress is natural. Sometimes we have unnatural amounts of stress, unproductive, damaging amounts. What do you think about how, as an individual in the workplace, not at home, but they're related, but as an individual in the workplace, how can he's not a leader, how can he or she manage stress? And then the second part is, as a leader, how can you affect the stress levels in your organization in an optimal way, a productive way?
So I think then, to answer your first questions, how can you deal with stress effectively? I think the number one thing is whether you're in control or not. So we all know that when stress seems unpredictable and like somebody else is controlling the situation, that's much worse than when something terrible happens to you, but you can work yourself out of the situation. There are things you can do. So I think the number one thing is to get your power back and to think about ways in which you can influence the situation. The worst thing you can do when you're stressed out is to just feel hopeless and say, oh, I'm just a victim, I can't influence the situation, there's nothing I can do. That's like not going to help you out of it. So research on mice, for example, has shown that there were two groups of mice, and one group was shocked with electroshocks, which is a stressor, and they had a lever they could press to turn it off. And the other group always received an electroshock when the other mice received one. So they received the same amount of electroshocks, but they could not turn it off. Which group did better? The ones with the lever. So it wasn't the stress itself that killed some of the mice. It was this feeling of being hopeless, out of control. So I do think that the number first thing for you to do when you feel stressed out is to ask yourself, what is one thing I can do right now that makes this a little bit better?
Yes.
To take action.
Yeah.
And then for people, I think it's important to understand that people have different optimal stress points. Neurophysiologically, with neurosignatures, some people can handle more stress than the rest of us. And so what stresses you might be different from what I can tolerate, right? And as a leader, I think it's important to understand that people reach their peak performance at different stress levels. We need a little bit of stress to get into flow. So a little bit of stress is good, but you need to reach that sweet spot of where you're slightly over-challenged. So as a leader, we go back to what we talked about in the beginning. You can't assume that everybody likes what you like. So what you find enjoyable is stressful for someone else. So hitting people's individual optimal stress points, I think that's an art in itself.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for that. You mentioned, obviously, the title of your book, Brain Friendly Workplace. I think we know what it is, but give us your definition of it. I don't think we've done that yet. And how can leaders obtain it, make it happen?
The brain-friendly workplace is a place where you can work in line with how your brain works best. So you can reach peak performance, you can reach well-being, you can have your best ideas, because the way the workplace culture is set up is a natural sync with your brain. You can look at it like this, like in a supermarket, when all the sweets are close to, where you check out, you're going to eat a lot of sweets. It's, statistics. You're hungry, you go shopping, you pick up those chocolate bars before you go out. If the supermarket has all these healthy things close to where you check out, you'll get more of those. And I think a brain-friendly workplace should be a bit like a healthy supermarket that brings out the best in people, where, the good things are lined up. At lunch, you get brain-friendly food. In the morning, people can expose themselves to sunlight. We can take walking meetings. Introverts get some silence and solitude. The high dopamine people can go and explore. The high serotonin people can work according to a plan. The high testosterone people can go out and compete. The high estrogen people can create a cozy atmosphere and establish good client relationships. So everybody can perform according to their neurosignature.
Yeah. And of course, it's all aimed at that out-based, the outcome culture. In other words, you just described a whole lot. And I think some leaders could sit there and say, I have to do all that and enable all of that, but we still have to get the mission accomplished. Assuming that I'm reading this right. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but it's so simple. It's like so simple. My book is like a blueprint for leaders to achieve that. So it's not like you have to do these million costly things and that take up your time. It's small things. If you take a meeting, take a walking meeting. Why, maybe if it's raining outside, you don't want to do it, but why don't you do it? Like, why do you have to sit in a meeting? That's inexpensive. That's a simple change you can do that will expose your brain to exercise, sunlight. You get more oxygen to your brain. Research has shown from Stanford that when people exercise or walk, creativity goes up by 60%.
Oh, yeah.
So integrate exercise into work day, and that's not so difficult. That's things such as making it a company policy that people are allowed to take walking meetings, or establishing a culture for that, or getting people standing desks, or putting these little rebounders in the office that just cost $50. So it's not about a long, annoying, difficult program. It's small things that can lead to big results.
Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, assuming that people are listening, they're going to buy your book, they want to, make the brain-friendly workplace happen. what are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes? Like, why aren't their workplaces brain friendly now? What are the top things that you see that they can implement? They could start attacking right now, even before they get your book in the mail.
Yeah, so what would the 5 things be? I think, first of all, for example, here's one simple thing. It's called fun, fear, and focus that puts you into flow. So when we have the right mix of chemicals in our brains, we can be up to 5 times more productive. You can just ask yourself, am I having fun? Do I have the right level of fear where it's not like boredom, but also not anxiety, but where you're just a little bit like nervous? And do you allow people to focus? That's 3 simple questions. And in every meeting, in every situation, like for example, the 2 of us here in this podcast, are we having fun? I think so.
Yeah, sure.
Is it, we know a lot of people are listening, so there's a little bit of fear. We're not totally relaxed. I'm not sitting here like biting my nails or munching chocolates. Or it's like, I don't care what these listen. Like we're all both a bit on our toes trying to hold a conversation,
right. Yeah.
And not messing this up completely. And then, of course, we're focused. Like we're focusing, we're listening. I'm listening to, we listen to each other and we're not at the same time checking our Instagram. And so we have fun, fear, and focus, and that makes us perform better. And that's a simple thing that doesn't cost the thing that you can think of in every situation in order to, get your brain into a very positive state of mind.
Well, thank you for that. That's enlightening. And our time is running out, but I can't let you out of here, Friederike, without asking you the big question, fantasy question. If you given the opportunity to bring one leader from the past back to life and spend a day with that person, who would you choose and why?
I think I'm thinking of 2 people. Can I pick 2?
Sure, yes, absolutely. No, it's good.
Okay, so I'm thinking of Sigmund Freud. Without him, I wouldn't be able to be a neuropsychologist today. I don't believe necessarily in all of Freudian theories, but he was the first to dissected brains, and did all these therapy sessions with people. So people thought he was crazy, and now everybody's doing it. So I think that must have been very interesting to be the first to do that and to look into people's brains and mental state and explore that. And I would have loved to be there and see it in action.
Yeah.
And the other person I'm thinking of is Leonardo da Vinci. I think there's so much excellence there. He was such a super brain. So I would actually love to just see how his day would look like. Did he do specific thing that made him so smart? Did he take naps? Was he taking walks? How did he spend his time to keep that excellence in so many different areas like art, engineering, anatomy, physiology? He was really a master brain, and I love excellence. So to me, that would have piqued my curiosity if he had some special, if it was just pure talent or whether he also had some special things he did to get in. Did he do, without knowing it, some fun, fear, and focus stuff to get his brain into flow?
Yeah. A follow-on question for that. I do agree with Sigmund, and I do agree Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, it's like he had the brains of 100 people in there.
Yeah.
He was just so good, and even more impressive, so prophetic, so future thinking. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, I don't know if you know this. I have jumped out of planes. He actually sketched a parachute. He sketched a design of a parachute, obviously centuries before planes were envisioned, but he was thinking jumping off of a building or out of a tree. But if you look at it and you didn't know it was his, clearly you would say someone drew a parachute. And so who thinks like that? Is there anybody today in today's world that you think shares some of those qualities?
Well, I'm sure there are people like this. I'm sometimes thinking, and those people that come maybe top of mind, you know, Richard Branson seems to be filled with idea, with like endless energy. I wouldn't maybe, you know, it's difficult comparing Leonardo da Vinci to anyone, or like Elon Musk also seems to be up to a lot of things all at once, that I'm just wondering, how does he do all that? So there are some people who just do things and seem to be able to do a lot of it and always be at top, ahead of the crowd in their thinking. I'm sure there are many, many more, you know, the problem very often is that those who have the best ideas are often ostracized by society. You know, I was also thinking about Galileo Galilei. He thought the earth wasn't flat, and, you know, this didn't go down so well. And so I think some of our brightest thinkers today are probably people that receive a lot of hate and you know, a lot of problems because they are ahead of us and they don't follow the mainstream thinking. And I think that's probably the people who bring innovation into the world. Not all of them, but some of them, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't want to color your suggestions. I believe all of the people that you said, Elon Musk for sure. If you take out a person's political views and their personal life, some of these people have troubles. But clearly he has insatiably smart. That's an understatement. And he has insatiable curiosity, and he has a lot of money. So when he has an idea, he starts a company. And so he's got so many diverse things going. I think the world is going to be better off 50 years from now that he and some of the other names and other names that we haven't mentioned exist. And I do think, yes, they share one thing in common. They're able to see over the horizon farther than most even really super smart people. Steve Jobs, you know, the iPhone, where it was going and things like that. And those kind of qualities, I think, have resonated through history. You know, Henry Ford, who, you know, is brought out Ford Company, Ford, you know, the Model T and all that. He had a famous saying. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but I say this all the time. At some point, he was quoted as saying, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." Can you make the horses faster? Faster wagons. In other words, they couldn't conceive of giving up horses for this. They couldn't conceive, and he had that vision. And I think the people that we've talked about and mentioned, they are not about faster horses. They are about the next level technologies that we can't even conceive of, and all of that. So yeah, it's a great conversation. We could probably do a podcast episode just on that topic alone. But listen, before I let you out of here, I think people are going to want to contact you. How do they contact you? Where do they find your books?
Yeah. So, you know, my website is friederikefabritius.com. I have a blog where I share brain-friendly tips every day. I have a newsletter where I share like more long-form brain-friendly tips. I'm all about offering solutions. So it's about things that lift people up, that empower people, and that they can implement right away, even without getting my book. Yeah. So I'm putting all that free content out there. And of course, I'm also on social media, so you can find me there with some combination of Friederike Fabritius, or in some places I have Friederike Fab, because, you know, I can't fit. I have a very long name and it doesn't always work out. And my book is available everywhere. So it's Amazon, it's Barnes & Noble, it's Books A Million, it's what else is out there? You know, all these platforms, they all have my book. And yeah, I can't wait. I also love hearing from my readers, because I mean, I love being lonely. So that sounds like writing is so lonely. It's not lonely for me. It doesn't feel lonely, but it's certainly a big moment for me when it actually hits the market and there are real people sitting there with my book, reading it. That's like, to me, it's not my first book, but still to me, that creates like a feeling of like, you know, when I go somewhere and I actually see somebody holding my book, like I have to walk up to that person and say, "Hi, it's me." Like, it makes me happy. So I love to hear from you. So yeah.
I've had that experience as well, and that's a dopamine hit. when you see somebody in the airport and you look and it's got your book. So I walked up to him and said, how do you like that book? And at first he didn't recognize me. He goes, oh, it's actually pretty good. And then he looked at the cover. It was a great feeling. I mean, an ego boost for sure, but I shared with you on that because, in your case, I'm sure people are emailing you all the time, telling you how much value that one tidbit in the book that just changed their life or awakened them and all of that. So anyway, our time's up, Friederike. I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights. This is going to be a popular episode. And selfishly, I would ask that you consider coming back again someday.
I'd love to. So I've learned a lot from you. I'm in awe of your background and your excellence and what you do. So thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Please be well.
You too.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.